All right. I'm going to get started. Just one thing before we get started. What used to happen up until this week was when I was recording something and I would press to go into record mode, I'd get a big blue bar that would go underneath and it would say, "You are now recording." Why am I telling you this? Because as of about Monday, it changed. And now there's a real little black thing that comes up and it says you are recording. It says the same thing. That said, I thought I recorded the other day and I talked for 3 hours. Nobody was there live, but I talked for 3 hours and it didn't record a flaming thing. So if for some reason this session today does not record, I'll have to get a hold of somebody from team support and I'll have to re-record it on my own. I just wanted you to know that. All right. So yesterday at the end of class, I emailed everybody a zipped file that's got a shell of a bunch of programs that we're going to go over today. I'm going to go over the calculator program. I've rewritten it basically pretty much the way that they ask for it in homework 6.1. And in homework 6.1, we get the calculator to work, but we do not add any exception handling. That comes in 7.1. So I've got two different copies of it that I gave out there for you, one in 6.1 and one in 7.1. Then we're going to look at the BMI program. And that is from, as it says there, it's a lab from chapter 7. Okay. And with that one, again, you'll see it twice. And what I mean by that is both of the the examples that I'm going to go over with you have got error handling, but one of them is kind of the old tried and true way. And then the other one, we are going to attempt to use the data validation functions that were in Muroc in chapter 7. All right. And that's what this says. So earlier this week, I sent everybody out a copy of the pretest. I'll probably go and resend it again just so everybody's got a copy. But tomorrow morning, I'm not going to start lecturing until 9:30. So you'll have an hour and a half to try to complete the pretest. What the pretest is I ask you to go back to those two examples that we had done previously on the last pretest, those being the Fahrenheit to Celsius converter and the batting average programs. And I ask you to go back and add exception handling to those. So I'll start that at 9:30 tomorrow morning. All right. And finally, as it says there, your number 3 hands-on test will be next Monday. All right. That's the 19th if I did my math right. And this Sunday, all the chapters 6 through 7 homework is due. Okay. All right. So with that said, let me change my share, and I've already got Visual Studio up and running. So that's what I want to do is I want to go to that. All right. Am I correct? Either one of you just answered that you can see Visual Studio, and right now you can see a yellow background where it's got the calculator on it.
Yep, we got it.
Okay, great. All right, so that'll allow us to get started. Now, what I have put in here, just so you know, and you can see it yourselves if you open yours, I put in a boatload of comments. All right, this is everything that we had from the book, basically, that they wanted you to do. All right, and then I've got in here, we're going to call in here, all we do in here is we're going to call a function in our click routine. We're not going to do very much. Again, ideally, what we want to do in our click routine is we want this click routine right here, this calculate buttons click routine in an ideal world. All right. We want this to be a driver. In other words, we don't want to have a lot of code in there. Rather, what we want to do is, for lack of better words, we just want it to call other routines to do stuff for us. Now, that would have been real easy, but when you look in here, this is again what we were asked to do. We were told to call calculate to perform the operation. We were told that when we called calculate, we were supposed to pass in 3 different parameters. One that represents the first number here, one that represents the second number here, and one that represents the operation. So in other words, if this is 10, if this is plus, and this is 20, ideally the result will be 30 when we add 10 and 20. That's what we're looking to do here. Now, again, I wrote it the way that they said. I wouldn't normally do it like this, but this is what, I tried to keep up with what they asked for. Now, remember, in this particular example, in 6.1 here that we're doing now, there is no exception handling. So the program is going to blow up if we put in something non-numeric into one of those text boxes or leave it blank. All right, so I've got here decimal number 1 equals convert dot to decimal, and it's txt operand 1 dot text. Then let's do another one. So decimal number 2, and it's going to be pretty much the same thing. Convert dot to decimal txt operand, but that's operand 2 dot text. So in other words, what we're asking in there is to take what was in here and convert it to a decimal, and to take what's in here and convert it to a decimal. That's what we've asked for in those 2 lines. Then, whoops, we're going to have a string and I just called it operator 1 because that's pretty much what it is. And I set that equal to txt operator dot text. So again, that one right there is what we put in here. What is being expected that we put in there is a plus sign or a minus sign or a multiply sign or a divide sign. That's what's expected to go in there. If we put something else in or leave it blank, again, the program is going to basically blow up, and that's okay. Finally, once we do all this, we want the answer. And I'm just going to initialize it to 0M. In other words, the answer's been initialized right now to 0. That's all I want to do. Now, I didn't even have to do that because in the next line, I said answer equals, and don't worry if I get an error here, calculate, and we want to pass in number 1, operator 1, and number 2. All right. And then when we get done, we want to say txt result dot text equals answer dot to string, and they wanted it to 4 decimal places for whatever reason, and that's fine. And then they wanted us to set the focus to operand 1. Now, if you look in here, you'll notice, what do we have? We've got answer equals calculate, number 1, operator 1, and number 2. All right, that's the routine they told us to call after we filled in the 3 text boxes. So really, where I've got decimal answer equals 0M here, I could just as easily have done this. That would have been totally legit to do that. In fact, I'll just leave it like that. It's a little less code. So what we're saying is when you call the calculate routine, pass whatever value is in there, pass whatever value is in there, and pass whatever value is in there. That's exactly what we just have asked for in here. So the reason I'm getting an error here is it's expecting me to return a decimal, and right now I'm not returning anything. So notice if I just type in here return 0M, the error goes away because now I'm returning something. All right. So what I'm going to do is in here, I am going to write the routine. All right. So what I want to return from here is my actual answer. What I want to return from here is my actual answer. what I return gets stuffed right into there. So I'm going to make a local variable in here. I could just call it answer again, but I'll just call it A. And I'll set it equal to 0M. So I'll set it equal to 0, and now I can return A. Now there's no errors. I could run this right now, but the thing is now no matter what I put in, it's going to just return 0. And I don't want that, of course, because that would be stupid. But I've got this thing in here. This, again, should be one of 4 values: a plus sign, a minus sign, a multiply sign, or a divide sign. All right, so I can do a switch on that. It's called operator 1. So I will do a switch on operator 1. All right, and it's pretty simple because if it's a plus sign, I want to say the answer is equal to operator 1 plus operator 2. Now, before I go on, and I'm going to in just a second, let me type in break here. All right, why didn't I see? We got decimal. Oh, it's operand 1 plus operand 2. I'm sorry. So operand, and that's perfect that I made the mistake, believe it or not. All right. Now, why did I say it's perfect? I made the mistake. Well, the names of these things are what? Number 1, number 2, and operator 1. So when I pass them, I have to call them, that's the actual parameter name right there. So when I call calculate, I have to pass their real names. But when I use them in here, I don't have to use those names. I can, but why don't I just call this N1, and I can call this op for operator, and I can call this one N2. All that bought me was a little less typing. But to me, I don't like, the word operand in there is kind of confusing. So now that works. So now I've got my pluses, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter here, and I'm just going to copy this in. All right, I'm going to actually put it in there 5 times. The last time is going to have the word default there. But all the other ones, I just have to change the sign now. So plus, minus, and minus, multiply, and multiply, divide, and divide. So this should now say that if I passed in 2 numbers, let's say 10 and 5, and I passed in a plus sign, it should return 15. If I did 10 and 5 and I passed in a minus sign, it should be 5. If I did 10 and 5 and I passed in a multiply sign, it should be 50. Virtually everything that's here, except if I in this case for the default, I passed in something other than a plus or a minus or a multiply or a divide sign. So I decided to put it in a message box dot show right here, and I said illegal operator entered. And then I put in here, in fact, I made it a little bit easier to read. You should always assume when you're writing these things that the person running it doesn't know what they're doing. So I'm going to say must be a plus sign, minus sign, multiply, or divide. And again, what I mean there is I'm assuming the person running that program doesn't understand what it is they just did wrong. All right, so I'll give them a title here that just says illegal operator. Right, and I will also put my message box button. I'll just put an OK button in there. And you know what? They did something wrong. So I will come in here and say message box icon dot error. Believe it or not, I'm done. Now, I'm going to run it, make sure it works, and then I'm going to go back over all of it. So File, Save All, and let's run it. Now, it should work if I put valid values in here, unless I miss something. So again, we'll keep it simple, 10 and 5. And I'll put in here a plus sign, and I get 15, a minus sign, and I get 5, a multiply sign, and I get 50, a divide sign, and I get 2. Now, if I leave this blank or put some garbage in there, I get this, illegal operator entered must be and it tells them. All right. Now, what I really should do after that is I should probably clear that out and put the focus there. And I didn't do that. So let's go back and do that. So if it's bad, so to speak, I want to clear out what was in there. So txt operator dot text equals double quote, and txt operator dot focus. Let's run it one more time to make sure I didn't break anything. So 6 minus 3 is 3. 6 plus 3 is 9. 6 times 3 is 18. 6 divided by 3 is 2. And if I put garbage in there, I get that error. I click there, and my cursor is back. My cursor is here, so I put it in the wrong field. So I just have to say operator. I'm not worried about that. We can fix that in a second. All right. So that should just say txt operator. Oh, it should have run there, but I don't know why it didn't. So let's go and very quickly look at all the code that was in here. And if you have any questions, this is your time to ask. Again, if I run the program and I leave this field blank, it blows up. That we're going to fix in the next iteration. Or if I put something non-numeric in here, it again blows up. And it's the same error. They're both format exceptions. We'll fix that in just a moment. All right. But we come in here, and when we click our calculate button, because this was supposed to be minding the requirements that we were given. And please, with a couple of you when you took the test, I'm not saying when you take the test you got to like the requirements, but those are your requirements. So if you are asked to do something, please make sure you do it. All right. There were people who did not rename the form, or they did not come in and set their tab order, or they did not set their accept button or their cancel button, and you lost points if that was you. All right. So please just mind what you are asked to do in the requirements. So again, this is the value in text box 1. This is the value in text box 3. This is the value in text box 2. All right. This is attempting to say, take whatever you put into number 1, run the operation on it that's in there to number 2, and then give me the answer. Then when we're done, put the answer into that text box and set the focus. All right. Are there any questions from either one of you? Are there any questions on what is in here so far?
Can you go back to the case or the switch case?
Sure. Yeah, we're going to do that right now. Okay. So yes. Okay. So when we come in here, it says this method should accept the following arguments: the decimal for operand 1, which I just renamed N1, the string for operator 2, which I just renamed op, and the decimal for operator 2 or operand 2, which I renamed N2. Why? Because that's the first number that we entered. That's the operation. That's the second number. All right. So this is the answer I'm going to return. And what I said in here was, if the operator we passed in was a plus sign, then add the two values. If it was a minus sign, subtract number 2 from number 1. If it's a multiply, divide or multiply them, and if it's a divide them. Now, again, and I'll run it in just a minute, but if I run the program and I put a 0 in for N2 and I do a divide, the program will blow up and it will give me a different exception. All right. Finally, if you don't enter any of those in there, it's just going to give you an error message, basically, in a message box. Did I answer your question?
Yes. I had some errors
Okay.
on there before, but I got it figured out.
Okay. So again, if I run this program now and I put in something valid, 34 divide, but if I put a 0 in here and I click calculate, notice I get a different exception, a divide by 0 exception. We will handle that in the next iteration of this. All right. So does anybody watching live here? And if there's silence, I'm going to go on. But are there any questions on anything in this particular example? All right. Then I'm going to do a file, save all. All right. And just so you know, I mean, what I've done is I gave you the GUI for all of these that I'm doing right now. So no, I'm not going to put the code out there. The code is, I'm doing it right now, and you can put it in yourselves as I'm doing. All right. So now I'm going to go to calculator 7, which looks the same, except it's got a different coloring in it. Let me reset my startup project. All right. And as we come in here and we view the code, you'll notice there are more comments now. These are the same comments we had before, exactly the same, except now we've got the new stuff. So add exception handling, and that's what we want to be doing right now. So as you'd probably guess, with exception handling, this is going to be a longer program. All right, and hopefully at least that just makes some sense to you. All right, so what do we want to do? Well, we want to add a try catch in our calculate routine that will catch any exceptions that occur when the statements are executed. If an exception occurs, display a dialog box with an error message that includes the type of the error and a stack trace. You're going to see all that. What I did, and it took a little bit of work on my part, it's not that it was hard, but I did something I had never done before. I decided that, you know what would be cool would be to just write one generic error routine that could handle any kind of error. So if there was an error, I'd have to let that generic routine know the type of error that occurred, the name of that error, all right, and be able to do the stack trace. But rather, let's if you had a very complex program, you literally could have 20 or 30 different exceptions you were trying to catch. I don't really want to write 20 or 30 different routines that are virtually all the same when I can write one routine and have it handle all of them. All right. Handle 3 additional catch blocks there to do an overflow, a divide by 0, and a format. You're going to see all those in just a moment. All right. Test the application then again. All right. Now, again, just like last time, I don't have the code. All right. I've got the code for my exit and I've got the code for my calculate, but you'll notice that right now, calculate is giving me an error just like it did before because it's supposed to be returning a decimal and it's not returning anything. So again, if I want to, I can just say decimal A for the answer equals 0M, and then down here, just say return A. Now that error is gone. It'll return 0 every time, but the error is gone. All right. We're going to write this a little later that's called display error report. So you're going to see all of this in a matter of moments. All right. But taking it from the top, at the start, this is going to look similar to what we did before, but then we're going to start adding things to it. What do you mean, Jeff? I'm going to show you right now. I started with decimal, so I'm inside of my calculate buttons, click routine. All right. And I'm going to say decimal number 1 equals 0M. And again, this is the value in text box 1. Then I'm going to say decimal number 2 equals 0M, and that's the value in text box 3. Then string operator 1 equals nothing, and that is the value in text box 2. Finally, decimal answer equals 0M, and that is literally going to be number 1 followed by operator 1 followed by number 2. All right, exactly the same stuff that we had done earlier. All right, now I'm going to add 2 more variables in here. I'm going to have a bool that I called result 1, and I didn't give it a value. And I just said, this will be the number 1 conversion result. So in other words, this is the variable that I'm going to use when I attempt to take whatever was put into that text box and convert it into a decimal. I'm also going to have result 2 in a minute, and that will attempt to do the same thing with that one. All right. So I've got result 1, and let me just copy this and make that result 2. And again, sorry there's all that green stuff there, but my question is there anything in any of these variables that are right here that don't make sense? All right, then I have a pretty big try-catch routine. And one of the reasons it's pretty big is I put a lot of comments in there because I want you to understand what I'm doing every step of the way. So I'm going to start with a try block. Now, whoops, that should have curly braces, not parentheses. That's why I'm getting the error. Now, when you do this, when you create a try block and you do this, you will notice that right here, there's a little red and it's saying, hey, you got a try block, but you don't have a catch block. We're going to put those catch blocks in later because there's going to be more than one of them. All right. So I want to come in here and I want to attempt to convert text box 1 value to a decimal. So again, I'm attempting to take what was put in here and I'm attempting to convert it into a decimal. Whoops, just like we did earlier, the same way we did it earlier. All right. And am I right in assuming you can, now if you look on the screen, you see the orangish color one? I want to make sure that you can see all my code. Yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to come in here and now I'm going to say result 1 equals decimal, and I did a dot try parse. It's not a convert. I'm telling it to try doing that. Try doing what? Taking what was in the text box, and if it works, put it into number 1. All right. So again, this is saying attempt to take what was in that first text box and attempt to parse it or convert it into a decimal. And if it succeeds, put it into number 1. All right. Now, I'm going to get rid of this. So if you are typing along, don't type this because I'm going to get rid of it in a minute. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type catch format exception FE. All right. And I'm just going to put in here message box. Again, I'm going to get rid of this in a minute. I'm going to say bad input. And I'm not even going to put anything else in there, but I just want you to be able to see that. All right. So let me save this. Let me come in here and run it. And I'm purposely leaving this blank. All right. And well, it should have blown up and given me some kind of an error, but it didn't. All right. Not sure why, but it didn't. Okay. Now, don't worry, because we'll get errors. We're going to get plenty of errors in a few minutes. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do the same thing. But now I'm going to attempt to take what was in text box 3 and do that. So the line 136 here is attempting to take what's in here and convert it into a decimal. Line 139 here is attempting to do the same thing, but with that value right there. All right. And I'm hoping that if you've got questions, you're going to ask. Now, when I get done, if this worked, result 1 is true. If it didn't work, result 1 is false. If this worked, result 2 is true. If it didn't, result 2 is false. All right. But I want to make sure. So what I said was, if either conversion fails, throw a format exception. So I'm taking control here and I'm saying if either not result 1 or not result 2. All right. If either one of those happen, and what does that mean? All right. We talked about this in earlier classes. Line 143 right here. That's the same thing as saying if result 1 equal false or result 2 equal false. So lines 142 and 143 are the same. But as you notice, we do almost double the typing in line 142. Now, I've said this to you before, I'm going to continue to beat on this same drum. And that is, if this does not make that much sense to you right now, but this does, then do it that way. And actually, there's even more parens in here than you need, because had I just done this, that would have been fine. In the same way, I can also do it just like this. All right. So you might say, well, that's fine. Then why did you do that? I like to leave no doubt to anybody who's reading the program that this is one of my routines that starts here, one of my checks, and it ends here. And this is my other check that starts here and it ends here. Some people find too many sets of parentheses confusing and they like to have less sets. Sometimes people actually like to have more because they think, oh, that's exactly what you're doing. Now I see. But either one of these ways that I just showed you, I showed you 4 ways technically, any of them will work. All right. So I'm going to come in here and I am going to throw a new format exception. Now, as of right now, I'm not catching it. Since I'm not catching it, all right, basically it's not going to do anything. So if I come out, the reason that I had that error before is I to put the catch inside of the try. So let me come down here and just say catch, format exception. All right. And let's see, this is catch format exception. And that's got to be in parens. And you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to just call it FE for format exception. And I'm going to put in here, just so you see it, I'm going to put a message box dot show. You know, something went wrong. All right. That's it. That's all I'm going to put there. So now if I leave either of these and if I don't parse them successfully, that should print. Let's see if that's indeed the case. So I'm going to leave the first one empty. Something went wrong. I'm going to put non-numeric in there. Something went wrong. All right. Now there's nothing in this one. So again, okay, something looks weird because it should be saying it there too, and it's not. So let's look. Result 1, result 2. That should be a 2. The problem that you run into, that I just ran into, is when you copy and paste too much, sooner or later, you're going to screw something up. I don't mean you, I mean anybody is going to screw something up. So let me try that again. And notice if I leave this one blank, I get the error. If I leave it non-numeric, I get the error. Now I get it again, and now it's for this one down here. So again, if I come in here, all right. So now I have covered the 4 cases where if I leave operand 1 empty or non-numeric, or operand 2 empty or non-numeric. So now I've covered that stuff in here. All right, now I'm not done with this yet, so don't worry about that. We're going to fix this. So if I get down to here, if I get down to that point right there, all right, then what do I know? Well, I know that I put a number in that text box, and I know I put a number in that text box. But there's still one more thing I have to check. I have to check to make sure what went in here is either a plus sign or a minus sign or a multiply or a divide. All right. So that's the next thing I want to come in and check in here. All right. So I want to come in, and there's no parsing in here, but I want to set text box 2 value to operator 1. So I'm going to say operator 1 equals txt operator dot text. So in English, this variable that I created up there, that one, I am setting that equal to whatever I put in here. So remember, what I can put in there can be legitimate. In other words, one of those 4 values, plus, minus, multiply, or divide, or it can be illegal. Be it blank, be it a number, be it anything other than a plus, minus, multiply, or a divide. All right. So what I have to do then is I now want to go in there and I now want to check to see if one of those things was not put in there. So in other words, did I possibly come in here now and put in something bad? So I'm going to check for bad input. All right. For operator 1. All right. And there's different ways that you can do this. Okay, there's different ways that you can do this. Now, one of the problems that you were asked to do on your homework was, I believe you were supposed to enter something into a text box and see how many vowels were in there. All right. And this is not the same thing, but it's sort of the same type of an idea. So I can come in here and say, if operator 1 is not equal to a plus sign, If it's not equal to that, and I'm just going to copy because it's much easier for me to copy in here than it is for me to keep typing. If it's not a plus and it's not a minus and it's not a, whoops, moved up. Try that again. And it's not a multiply and it's not a divide. Look at that and please make sure you understand what that is saying. All right. If what I put in there was either a plus or if it was a minus or if it was a multiply or if it was a divide, if I did put in one of these symbols, then whatever one of these I check is going to be false. And with an and, everything must be true. So if it's not one of those, all right, so I'm going to throw a different kind of exception here. It's not a format exception. It wasn't formatted incorrectly. No, I want to throw a new argument exception. All right. And sometimes the only way that you can actually learn what this stuff is to go, and that's why I gave you that resource from Tutorial Teacher that had the different kinds of exceptions. That's not the kind of thing, first of all, you're probably, unless you're working with this on a daily basis, you're probably not going to memorize it. You're just not going to. But you know, part of being a good programmer is knowing where to look. All right. Years ago, when I was teaching at a technical college in Wisconsin, we had a computer club. And we probably had about 50 students who were in the club. And we had a guy who graduated in the program, and he was a programmer. And I contacted him and asked him if he would come and speak to our class or speak to the computer club one day during the lunch hour. And he was nice enough to do so. And he had his his name is Mike, and he's like, Mike's 10 different tenets, different things. And number one was Google is your friend. So if you forget how to do something and you Google it, it's not that it's a bad thing. I mean, back when I was your age and I was doing this, we didn't have Google. So I had to just grab manuals and be looking through paper manuals. Much nicer now that you've got Google. So now I have checked for a bad number one or a bad number two and handled it. I have checked for a bad operator and handled it. So if I get down to here, I know if I get to here, I know that one, valid value for number one was input. Two, valid value for number two was input. And three, valid value for operator was input. And again, this is the kind of thing that just has to make some sense to you. All right. That's all I can tell you is it has to make sense. All right. So if it doesn't, you know, hopefully you're either typing along with me or, you know, you're doing screenshots. You're hitting your print screen key as I'm doing this and copying it to the clipboard. All right. So I'm going to come in here just like we did before. Now I'm going to say answer is equal to calculate. And I'm passing in number one, number two. Oops, I got to do it in the right order. So number one, operator one, and number two. Right. And I can do that now because I know that it's, you know, when we got to that point, it's valid. And I can also say txt result dot text is equal to answer dot toString to 4 decimal places, like we talked about before. All right, so I can put another comment here. Put answer in text box 4. And then what we were told to also do was set focus to text box 1. So I'm going to say txt operand 1 dot focus. All right. Okay. Now, just because I don't want to waste your time. Okay. And what do I mean? Well, when we get down to this thing, this calculate routine, it's exactly what we did before. It's exactly the same. So I'm going to go back to the one that we did before, just so I don't have to waste time rekeying in the same stuff. All right, so I'm going to go down and I'm going to grab the calculate routine that's right here. In fact, I'm going to grab everything because it's all been renamed. Okay, I'm going to grab that, copy it to the clipboard, and then come back here and paste it right there. All right, so it's the same routine. Okay, so we've got all that done. So the only thing that's left to do is to handle all of our errors. And to handle all of our errors, we're also going to write our own custom error type of thing. All right. So let me start doing this. Just start with it. And I'm going to put in here 4 different catch statements. All right. And that'll take us to our break. And then after the break, we're going to write this routine. And if everything works, okay, we'll be done with this one. So I'm going to first catch a format exception. And again, that's called FE for format exception. In fact, I called it FEX, format exception. All right. And to do that, all right, and I already did it up here, so let me get rid of that one. That's why it's giving me the error. All right, I'm going to call this display error report, and I'm going to pass it in the type of exception that I got. So there's one. Here will be the next one. Catch argument exception. AX argument exception. And I'm going to call display error report. I'm going to pass in AEX. Next, I'm going to catch an overflow exception. And I'm going to again call this display error report and pass in that overflow exception. And then finally, I'm going to catch the divide by 0 exception. And again, I'm going to call the display error report. So now, even though I'm not, right now, if I ran it, it wouldn't be doing anything because I haven't written this display error report. The good news is when we run that display error report, it's literally only a few lines. All right. But now we're doing something every time. Okay. And just to show you this, because we're taking a break right now, but if I did come in here and write in message box dot show, and I'm going to just so there's something here, error, error, error. And I put in here bad stuff. And I put in, my message box buttons dot okay and my message box icon dot error because it's an error. All right. Now what you'll notice is by doing that, if I come through here now and run this and I leave this blank, error, error, error. If I put something non-numeric in it, error, error, error. All right. If I put a number in here, error, error, error. All right. If I put something like that in there, all right, error, error, error. But if I do that, I'm getting my answer. All right. It is 8:56. Let's come back, please, at 9:10 We'll finish this one up and then we're going to jump right into looking at the ones for BMI. All right. So I'll be back. I got to refresh my water. I'll be back in a couple minutes. All right, it is 9:10 and I am back. So I'm going to exit, and all that's left is to write this. Well, again, we don't want to write error, error, error. That would be kind of stupid. But what I want to do is I want to basically come in here, and for my title, I wrote error message details. All right. And what I want to change is what's up here. So it's, I'm going to type 3 or 4 lines, but that's about it. So I'm going to say the following error type occurred. Right? And then I'm going to put down what that error type was. And the way you do that is you say the error type EX for the exception dot get type dot to string. How did I know that? I didn't remember that. I went and grabbed it from our book. It showed it in the book. All right. So that'll show the error type. Then I want to show the error message. So the following error message. And that is ex.message. Now, when I do that, it's going to look kind of bad. I'm going to put a couple \n's in between each one of those. All right. And if you don't know why, you'll see why in just a moment. Okay. And this needs a plus sign here. There we go. So when this runs, it'll say the following error type occurred, and then it'll have the error type. Then it'll have a couple blank lines and it'll say the following error message. Or maybe it's better with the following error message. And then I'll give the message. The other thing we were told to say was this stack trace. All right, so again, I will need another plus sign here. And then I can say \n. Here is the stack trace plus ex dot stack trace. And that's everything. So before I run it, which I'll do in just a second, if I come through here and I have any of these types of errors, any of these 4 types, so either a format or an argument or an overflow or a divide by 0, it should come in here and say, for example, the following error type occurred as an example here with divide by 0 exception, with the following error message, and then whatever error message they give. And then the stack trace, which is what routine called what routine, etc., that came up with that. So I'll leave that up there for a second. So if you do want to copy it down, you can. And again, all I'm doing here is following the requirements that we were given. That's it. Nothing special, nothing extra really that I added, except as I mentioned, I thought it would be a better idea to try to write one generic error handling routine than it would be, all right, to write 4 different ones, which were basically going to say the same thing. All right, so let me do a save all. And then let's look at some of these different types of errors that we get. Now, remember, this is going to come up with a message box. I cannot change the size of the message box. Or if there is, I don't know how to do it. I know how to change it where it is on the screen, but the text is going to be small and I can't make it any bigger. So I'm going to do a file, save all, and I'm going to run it. First thing I'll do is not put anything at all in there and click calculate. Now it says the following error type occurred, system.format.exception, with the following error message. One of the identified items was in an invalid format. Here is the stack trace, and there's that. All right. And again, that was a format exception. If I come in here and put in this, I still get a format exception. All right. Something real quick here that I added one more thing to this that I didn't show you. Maybe I didn't. Okay. All right. So, again, when you look at this, that's kind of bad. I still have to do that. We'll talk about how to fix that in just a bit. But now if I come through here and let's put in 45 and let's click it again. Now notice it's still saying a format exception. I thought this would be an argument exception right here. Let me come in here and put in another number here. Yep, and now I'm getting the argument exception right there. Remember, I checked first for operand 1, then I checked for operand 2. So there's the argument exception. Very similar. The following error type occurred. System.argument exception with the following error message. Value does not fall within the expected range. And there's the stack trace. Finally, if I come in here and I put in a divide and I put in a 0, all right, and I click calculate. Now I get a system divide by 0 exception with the following error message. Attempted to divide by 0, and there's the stack trace. So it's handling those. The only one that I had problems with was that overflow exception. And technically, if I come through here and do something like this, it should give me an overflow exception because I've got a number that's too big. I'm just going to put in 2 of them there. But it's giving me a format exception. For some reason, I thought that would have given me an overflow exception. Maybe I just have to investigate that more. But the point is this. I've got everything now, to my knowledge, everything is covered. So if we take one last look at this, all right, and we take it from the top, this is virtually the same program as the previous one I wrote. This stuff is exactly the same. But now we have added rather exception handling. That's where these came in. And this was to make sure that I could take what was in text box 1 and convert it to a decimal. That's result 1. And the other one was to make sure I could take what was in text box 3 and convert it to a decimal. So I immediately tried to do both of those. If either one of them failed, I threw a new format exception. I took control and said that's what I wanted to have happen. All right. If I got down to here, I know that the numbers in both text boxes, there was a number in both. That's all I know. So I have to go in and again, it's expected that I'm putting either a plus sign or a minus sign or a multiply sign or a divide sign into the second text box. All right. If it is not one of those, then I threw a new argument exception. So finally, if we get down to this point right here, we know these 3 things. Number 1 text box has got a number in it. Number 2 text box has got a number in it. And the operator has got either a plus sign, a minus sign, a multiply sign, or a divide sign. There's still one thing we have to look out for, and that's that divide by 0 error. But we can call our answer routine. And when it returns, we can stuff its value into the associated text box and set the focus. All right. And this, again, this is exactly the same as what we wrote before. That's why I copied it in. So our actual parameters that we passed in here when we call this, those being number 1, operator 1, and number 2, Those are the actual parameter names. Inside of the method itself, these are called the formal parameter names. I didn't come up with those names, actual and formal. That's just the way they're referred to. And the formal name does not have to be exactly the same as the actual name. It can be, but I just wanted to do less typing. So instead of typing out number 1, I'm just typing out N1. Instead of typing out number 2, I'm typing out N2. And instead of typing out operator 1, I'm typing op. But again, it's the exact same routine. All right. So we have been told that one of 4 things can happen. We can either get a format exception, or we can get an argument exception, or we can get an overflow exception, or we can get a divide by 0 exception. Now, I don't know if this is right or not. It's possible the reason that this thing never hit, when you put these in, you've got to put the most expressed, the most non-general, the most specific exception has to come first. Then the next most, then the next most. This should be the least most specific exception. It is possible, I don't know, but it is possible that if I move this up, and I don't know if this will work or not, but now I can possibly generate an overflow exception. All right, and I'm going to try doing it in a different way. So I'm going to do a save all here, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to put in 1, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm going to multiply, and I'm going to put in 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's put in a few more. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Multiply it. Now, it is trying to give me that answer. All right, I think it's because I made those doubles. And a double or a decimal will hold, I think it's a number to like 26 decimal places, or 26 places or something like that. There we go. It still says it's a format exception, but I thought that was how you generated an overflow, that you took a humongous number and did another humongous number, and then whatever you tried to put in here. All right, so if there's a different way of generating an overflow exception, which is what they asked in the book or in our requirements, I don't know what it is. Let's clear that. All right, so if it was overflow, we call display error and we pass OEX, overflow exception. This can be named anything you want. I could have just called it O, and I could have called this one F, and this one A, and this one D, and it would have worked fine. Most people, when they give them, they put EX in there someplace. Since that was an overflow, OEX, format was FEX, argument was AEX, divide by 0, a little more specific, DBZX. Then I just wrote a generic routine that printed out the error type, followed by the error message, followed by the stack trace. The whole thing was entitled error message details. There's just an OK button on it, and it is an error because if that did happen, it was because some kind of an error was thrown. So again, my question to you is, are there any questions on this particular example? I can go back and look at the code. I can show you anything you need, but I want to make sure that what we've done here makes sense. So any questions? All right, then I'm going to save this. And I'm going to go on. And what I mean is, I am now going to go on to the first BMI program that's in here. All right. And that looks like this. Let me get rid of all this junk. All right. And the idea is you put a number in here, you put a number in here, you click calculate. If the numbers that you put in were within range, it figures out the person's body mass index. I even added a little caveat or something that was not in the specs, but it tells you if for your height, if you're overweight, underweight, optimal weight, or obese. All right. But right now, when you look at it, change that. It's not really operational at all. Except the clear button works and the exit button works. All right. So I'm going to go on and start to write that particular code right now. So let me go and change to viewing my code. I'm taking for granted that you can read this and that you can read what's highlighted now is LBL or Lab 1 BMI. I'm taking for granted you can read that. All right. If you can't, you better say something. Now, what I didn't like about this program, and Mr. Smith wrote these specs, it's not that there's anything wrong with them, but they're not all that realistic. So I'm going to change this. I'm going to change the weight to just 1 pound, and I'm going to make the maximum to 777 pounds. And let's see. For the height, I'm going to say 12 inches is the minimum, and the maximum I'm going to make 96. It's totally fine to leave in what he had in there, but I like mine a little better. All right. So that means I got to change these. So the minimum height is now 12. The maximum height is now 96. The minimum weight is now 1. And the maximum weight is now 777. All right. I just think they're a little bit more reminiscent of real values. That's probably too high. And I don't think there's ever been anybody in history that has been more than 7 foot something, but that should cover everything. The only thing I didn't that was based on the specs was I didn't make this or this appear as red in their color. And there are ways that you can do that. You got to go in and play with the color of it. I just didn't do that. I didn't think personally that was that important. All right. You will never, on a test that I'm given, that I give, I will never ask you to do something like that. It's not that there's anything wrong with it. I see the value in it. All right. So as long as you're under 18.5, you're underweight. If you're greater than or equal to 18.5 and under 25, you're optimal weight. So that's the minimal weight for an optimal person. I'm sorry, the minimum BMI for an optimal weight person is 0.5. The minimum BMI for an overweight person is 25. And the minimum BMI obese person is 30. Why I've got those numbers right there. All right. Again, I'm trying to be a little specific here. And before we go on, I'm trying to let you know what I did and why I did it. All right. Okay. This is just what I want to print out because at the end I printed out their actual what they were. If they were overweight, if they were optimal weight, that actually should say right there. I don't know. I missed that. Wait. Sorry. So under, optimal, over, and obese. All right. These are the global variables I used. Did I have to make them global? No, I just did. To be honest with you, when I was writing this, I got to the point where I'm not going to say I was bored, but I just thought, just the heck with it. I'm just forget it. All right. So I'm going to show you the way again that I wrote this. And I'm looking at it right here. And I do have exception handling in here. So we will talk about it. We will use exception handling, but then we'll come back after we finish this and we'll rewrite it. And at that time, I'm going to jump back into our book because in chapter 7 in the book, Muroc showed you how to write generic exception handlers. All right, so I want to show you those. All right, so as we go in here then, and as we get started, as it says, this method executes when the calculate button is clicked. All right, again, I probably put too much code in here. I can tell by looking at it. Yeah, I put in too much code, but I'm going to just give it to you the way that I wrote it. So this is the code that's in our calculate button. So the first thing that I did in here, and I've done this in programs before, but again, this is how I wrote it. I've got a Boolean that I called keep going, and I set that equal to true. And I just call that my program continue variable. All right. And in the past, on occasion, I have had people ask me, why did you do it like this? Why'd you do it like this? And although it's not really an answer, I basically have told them I did it like that because I did it like that. In other words, sometimes I just am sitting here and I start to write code. And I might look at it and go, it'd probably be better if I did this, so I'll change it. Other times I'll write code and I'll go, that's not terrible the way it is, and I'll leave it the way it is. All right. So I said keep going equal to validate height. That's the one I'm going to do down here in just a moment. I'll write it in a second. All right. Now, if keep going from validate height returned true, then a valid height between 12 and 96 was inputted. All right, so that should make sense to you. So I'll put a comment here that says validate height between 12 and 96. And again, if it does that, it was inputted. So validate that weight is between 1 and 777. Whoops. So now I want to say if keep going equals validate weight. All right, so I'm going to validate the weight now. Now, there is an else on here, else. So if that is true, if that else is hit, if the else is hit, validate weight returned false, meaning that the weight was not within range. All right. So on the else that's right here, and again, you might say, why'd you do it like this? Again, because I did. I just returned. There's no sense in going on and validating the weight. All right. There's no sense in going on. All right. So just so you know, this original Boolean keep going right here, I could have just said bool keep going equal, and I could have immediately called validate height. I did it the way that I did it here because I wanted to write comments. All right. So as we were going along the way, so you could see everything I was doing. All right. So now if keep, no, that's right. If keep going is still true, then both the height and the weight were within range. All right. So we can calculate both the BMI and the BMI status. All right, so that's if keep going is still true, and I'm going to put that right here, that means that validate height returned true and validate weight returned true. So I put in values that were valid. So if keep going, well, what do I want to do? Okay, I want to say BMI equals calculate BMI. All right, right now there's a routine with that name, but it's not doing anything. Not only that, I want to say BMI status equals calculate BMI status. And we're going to write that in just a minute. And then finally, I want to display the BMI stats. I don't have any errors here because I gave you the empty functions for those. If you do, then I thought that was what I gave you. I went and grabbed this morning, I grabbed the same folder that I sent to all of you the other day. All right. So if keep going is still true, I had a valid height, I had a valid weight. So calculate the BMI, then calculate the status as being underweight, optimal weight, overweight, or obese, then display both of those, display the BMI and the BMI status in the text box at the bottom of the page. All right. Otherwise, now I could do this and I could say else return. But you know what? Why do that? I'm already at the bottom of the function. So if it's not true, it's going to hit that last curly brace and it's going to return anyway. All right. So I could put else return there, but as I said, that in many ways, then that's redundant to say that. It's not that it's wrong, it's just redundant to say it. All right. Now what you're going to see is some code that's going to look similar to the example that we just looked at with a calculator for chapter 7. So let me get in here into validate height. All right. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, I've got this Boolean ret val that equals true, and then I've got, return ret val. But between that, I first want to come in here and say bool result, and I'm not going to give it a value. I could, but I really don't have to. All right. So I'm going to come in here and say try result equal, and I was assuming that when you put in your height and your weight here, you were going to put in whole numbers. We could make this a decimal or a double, but if somebody says how much do you weigh, you don't typically say I weigh 198.83 pounds. People just don't typically say that. It's just like when somebody asks your birthday and you say you're 26. You can say I'm 26 in 3 months and 14 days. People just usually don't talk like that. That said, and you guys might laugh at this, it's not really meant to be funny. I'm always amazed, when, oh, how old's your baby? 33 months. And it's like, why make me do math? But some people do talk like that, I guess. So result equal int 32 dot try parse. What am I parsing? txt height dot text. If it works, where do I want to put it? Into height. So again, that's either going to succeed or it's going to fail. If it fails, that means that what I put in there was not a number. So I'm going to throw a new format exception. All right. Now remember, if I do come in there, if I want to take charge of what happens here. So I'm throwing the exception. An exception will be thrown if I don't do it like this. But I want to throw the one I want, and I want to be able to handle it in a routine later on, the way I want to handle it. So if I get down to here, so right here, if result is false, a non-numeric value was inputted for the height. All right. If I get to here, a number was inputted for the height. Now do a range check. In other words, height should be greater than or equal to 12, and height should be less than or equal to 96. Okay, so that's what I'm going to check now. So if the height is less than the min height, or the height is greater than the max height, well, again, we've talked about this kind of thing before. We have put an out of range value in there. So I'm going to go and throw a new argument out of range exception. I'm throwing what it is. All right. So that was all within my try block. And you already know this, but if I got to try, I want to put a catch in here. So this will be the catch. And I'm first going to check for my format exception, which again I called FEX. And just like we did in the last example, I'm going to call here, I think I just called it show message this time. And I'm going to pass a couple things in here. This is new. This is the first time we're doing this in a program. Please look on your screens. I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to click in that text box. And in my properties window, right there, I'm going to go down and find the tag property and type in the word height, all lowercase. Then in here, for my weight, I'm again going to go into the properties window. And in lowercase, I'm going to type in the word weight. So I've got height and I've got weight. Why? Because I'm going to use them in my routines. I want to tell it if it was a bad height, that I want the error to say bad height. But if it was a bad weight, I want the error to say bad weight. All right. And if it's a bad height, I want it to clear that value and put the focus there. If it was a bad weight, I want it to clear that value and put the focus there. All right. Okay. Move this over. So I'm going to call show message. And when I do, what do I have to pass it? Well, you'll see this in a minute, but I have to pass the type of the type of exception. So that's FEX from right there. All right. Plus, I have to let it know what tag it was. You can't just type in tag. You can, but I don't think it's going to understand it. So I put in here txt height dot tag, but it doesn't like that either, dot toString. And that's going to end up literally passing in there the word, it'll pass in there the word height. All right. I also want to go into my label, LBL results.text, and I want to put in that invalid height message. Finally, I want to say my return value. So my ret val is false. I want to return false because what I put in there, not fossil, false, because what I put in there was bad. If the try made it all the way through and there were no errors, I won't do that catch and I'll just return that. But I'm not done yet because remember, now I've handled this exception, but I didn't handle this one. So I need another catch in here. I'm going to do almost the same thing. So I'm going to make this an argument out of range exception. And again, I call this argument out of range exception. And I want to pass that in. All right. And I want to do basically the same thing. I could have taken, I could have taken these two lines, put them in their own routine because these two lines are exactly the same as these two. So I could have written a new routine that had two lines in it. So it would have been two lines as opposed to four. I didn't. I could have, but I didn't. So that's everything for validating the height. Now, normally I wouldn't do it like this, but I'm going to grab everything I've got in here, everything. So it's everything between the first curly and the last curly. And I'm going to put it in here for my validate weight. Now I've got to dig through here, and every place I've got a H for height, I've got to change it to a W for weight. Now I want to check to make sure that the weight is greater than or equal to 1, and the weight is less than or equal to 777. So again, this will be a W. So will this. So will this. So will this. And if I miss one, we're going to know when I run the program. Now, and I'm going off my Cliff Notes here. I wrote it, so I'll take credit or I'll take blame for it. That's totally fine. Right? That should handle it, but now in here, I got to write my show message, and it's going to be very similar to what I wrote before. It's not going to be the same. All right. So I'm going to put in here a message box.show. And the first thing I put in here was invalid. And this is the first time I'm going to actually use the tag. So that should say invalid height, or it should say invalid weight. That's good. That's what I want it to say. Was inputted. All right. Plus, and I'm going to add some more stuff down here. The error message. Just like we looked at before. All right. So I'm going to say ex.message. Now, I did not print out in here the type. We could have done that as well. So if you want, I mean, I can come in here and say plus the error type. And again, I didn't print out the back trace because we weren't asked to, but I could print out that too. May have said back trace, I meant stack trace, so. All right, so that is, I think that's like that. So then now, again, I can say error information. And again, I can come in here and say message box, buttons okay. And since it's an error, message box, icon.error. That's that whole routine. Okay? That has handled everything except, well, we didn't calculate the BMI yet. All right, and that's down here. The good news is that calculating the BMI is literally, I think it's a line long, something like that. The whole routine. All right, and I want to return it as a double, so I just return, and it's this. I got the formula from the internet. Weight times 703.0 divided by math.pow height 2. So it's weight times 703 divided by height squared. That's the whole routine. That'll calculate the BMI. So I should be able to save this now. So file, save all. And if I run this and put in 72 for a height, 72 for a height, and 111 for a weight. No, it's not. I guess I thought it should print it, but it's not, and that's okay. We'll get it. All right, let's figure out the status. Well, in order to figure out the status, it needs to know what the BMI is. So if the BMI was less than min optimal, that means if it was less than 18, then the status is equal to overweight. All right. Otherwise, if the BMI was less than min over, then the status was equal to optimal. All right, so again, if this is true, this is saying BMI is less than 18.5. All right, if this is true, it is saying the BMI is greater than or equal to 18.5 and the BMI is less than 25. All right. Else, if BMI is less than min OBE, and that is saying that the BMI is greater than or equal to 25.0 and the BMI is less than 30.0. So if that's the case, their status is over. This should not have been over. This should have been under. All right. And then finally, if it's not one of those, all that's left is their status is obese. So again, that is the case where, oops, I did that. Oh, it doesn't like that on that line. All right, so I'll put it here. So here the BMI was greater than or equal to 30.0. All right, so that should be everything. Now, I'm not displaying it. That's why I didn't get any output before. So all I want to do is say txt. In fact, let me put it in there as a string. So string str equals body mass index, also known as BMI, plus BMI dot toString. I'll do it to 2 decimal places. All right, so that's it so far. Then let's add to that the body mass index status, and that'll just be the BMI status. That should be everything. So we can go back and look at it in a minute, but let's see if it works. So file, save all. If I leave this empty, invalid height was inputted. The error message, one of the things identified was an invalid format. It is a format exception, and there's a stack trace. Not only that, if I put in some garbage here, it says all that stuff. Oh, it's not removing it. I got to fix that. Might have left a line or two off of there, so let me double check. Can't even go through my own notes here. That's right. So let me clear this. Let me exit. All right. What I did was where I wrote that error routine right in here, the show message. All right. I checked to see what the tag was. So if the tag was equal to height, well, then I know that what I want to do is I want to say txt height dot text equals double quote, all right, and txt height dot focus. Else, if the tag, and it's got to be, it's a string, so it's got to be in double quotes. Let me just steal all this because I just got to change my H's to W's. Otherwise, if it's equal to weight, then I want to say txt weight W. All right, so that should fix everything. Let me try running it one more time. Okay. Somehow I put a parenthesis in there. I don't know how or why, but I did. So if I put in garbage here, calculate, it gives me the information, it clears it, and there's my cursor. If I do it here, and you may have noticed it said invalid height for the first one. Now it should say invalid weight, and it does. And if I put in junk in there, again, invalid weight, clears it. So all that appears to be working. So if I come in here and say 72 and 111, that isn't working yet. So all my invalid stuff's working, but I've got to fix that. So let's see if we can fix that. I think I had one more routine at the bottom. Here we go. Some reason that isn't displaying. So let's look. Oh, how about this? txt results dot text equals str. All right. So I'm filling it up right there, but I never told it to display it. What doesn't it like? Okay, I must have called something else. txt. Okay, it's lbl results dot text equals str. Okay, so that should, I've already run it with bad data, but let's run it with good data. All right, good. So there was an underweight, there is an optimal weight, good. There's an overweight. And there's an obese. All right. So real quickly, if you didn't need it or whatever, I want to go back one more time and quickly go through everything that was in there. So taking it from the top. Those were our constants for maximum and minimum height and weight. I changed them. You could leave them the way they were or change them or use your own. These were my two error message constants. All right, so those are program, let's say, height and weight constants. These are the program error message constants. These are the program BMI status constants. Say checks. And these are the program BMI status constants. Sorry, there's a truck outside my house. All right, those are our global variables. And then we come in, and the first thing that we do, again, if you think it's cleaner, we could have done it also like this. Program should still work just fine. It actually is a little cleaner to look at. So I could still come in here and put in a comment that says validate height is between 12 and 96. All right. So we validate that, which is going to return true or false. If it returns true, we then tell it to validate the weight. If it returns false, we tell it to return. After we validate the weight, which again returns either true or false, if it returns true, we calculate the BMI, we calculate the BMI status, and we print out the associated information. If it returned false, we're dead in the water, so we just stop. Since we're at the end, we don't have to go any further. Then we validate our height here. So I attempt to take whatever was put into that first text box and convert it into an integer. If I can, it puts it in height and result is true. If I cannot, result is false. If result is false, I throw a new format exception. If I get down to here, I put in a number. It's all I know. So I check to make sure that if it's out of range, so if it's less than 12 or it's greater than 96, now I throw a new argument exception. All right, and then I have to account in here for both my format exception, and if that's the case, I call my show message, I pass the exception type, and I pass the tag. This will print my error message, invalid height or invalid weight on the screen, and it'll return false. All right. This will do the same thing, except rather than a format exception, it'll be an argument out of range exception. If all of this worked, if everything here worked, all right, regardless. Okay, in fact, this should actually be and it's good because it allows me to tell you this should be in what's called a finally block. And a finally block runs whether the, let's see, cannot leave the body of a finally. Okay, so it doesn't want it like that. But if you have a finally, again, that's used for housekeeping operations. All right, and the finally, typically, like if you got a database open, it closes it. If you got a file open, it closes it, etc. Oh, it says that I lost you. Trying to let you back in, but it's not letting me. Chad, if you get a message up that says that Grant is trying to get in, can you try to let him in, please? Should be able to get it.
Seems to have worked.
You tried to admit him?
Yeah, I clicked admit.
Okay,
He
hopefully
popped
he's
back in the lobby for me.
Okay, all right. Okay, so then we do the exact same thing, except again, I replaced every H for height with a W for weight. So it's the exact same stuff. All right, our show message again allowed us to write one generic error routine that would handle everything. All right. And then we checked it if it was, we made sure that the right field in here was going to be cleared and the focus set. And then the calculate was simple. This is, again, I pulled that from the internet. All right. And then we did our status. So that's everything. Either one of you have any questions on anything we've done here before we go to our next break? Anything you need repeated or shown on the screen? All right, I'm hoping then, since nobody is saying anything, that it's making sense. All right. The only other thing I want to mention, and in fact, I'll mention it after the break because it's 10:04. Let's come back, please, at 10:20. We're going to rewrite this, and I'll show you the routines that we're going to use to rewrite it at that time. So 10:20, please, let's return. All right, it is 10:20, so I'm going to continue. I'm going to do the other one right now, but a couple things before we get into that. First of all, it looks just like the first one, okay, and the last one that we just did. They look exactly the same. So I think what I will do, get rid of both these. I don't know which one is which now. All right. Is the first thing I'm going to do is make that my startup project. All right. And when I bring the form up, I'm just going to change the color on it. All right. So you can tell that I'm not going to change the other one. So make it purple. Make this purple as well. It's a little dark. Yeah, that's fine. We'll make the text on it white. So I think that comes out just fine. All right, so it looks a little bit different. That's the first thing. Let me do a file save all. So I've got that and run it, make sure that everything is taken. There, that looks good. All right, so that's the first thing. The second thing is as I change my share here. All right, so let me stop sharing and start again. And I'm going to go to the internet and I want to go to, this is from chapter 7, page 200. Chapter 7, page 210, page 210 in our book. And it talks about how to validate data. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. The first 3 programs that we've gone over today, that is the 2 iterations of the calculator program and our first example of the BMI, I've written those. I didn't write this one, so I'm doing this one off the top of my head, so hopefully I won't screw up. So how to validate. And if we look in here, what do we have? This is checking if something is there or not there. All right. So rather than me having to write one thing to check if the height is there and another one to check if the weight is there, I'm going to do this one. All right. And I'll be able to check that way. Okay. Hopefully I'll be able to do that. All right. And then we can check to make sure that that the parsing works. And we can check to make sure that it's within a valid range. So it should cut down on the amount. And here's the generic versions that are on 213. All right. So there is the is present, is decimal, and I'm going to use mine. I'm just going to make it an is int instead of an is decimal, and a range check. So much of the code that we had previously will be the same. All right. So what I'm going to do, whether this is good, bad, or indifferent, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the program and I'm going to grab the last one that we have just done. The yellow one, if you want to call it that. And the comments are the same. I think I may have made some changes in here. All right, because I had something that was screwed up. So I put some more comments in here also. So I'm going to grab those. And I'm going to put them into the other one. So in other words, I'm going to put that into here. I just don't want want you to have to watch me constantly going back and copying and doing this and that. To me, that's a waste of your time. All right. Okay, so I've got that. And I think I kept all the names and everything. I believe I kept all the names in here the same. All right. Tried to do that at least. So let's go back in here. All right. And let's just start it with a calculate here. In fact, I'll just grab it right here. I'm going to grab everything for the rest of the program. I'm going to make changes, but I just want to grab everything. So that's about 220 lines I'm grabbing here. And I'm going to go back up to my calculate right there and grab everything that's in there. Hopefully I'm not going to get any errors when I do this. Looks like I didn't. So now the 2 programs are identical to one another. I don't want that, but that's what I've got right now, and that's okay. Stop being so anal about this stuff there. I'll fix it all later. So what do I want to do? All right, well, first thing I want to do is I want to go down into my validate height and my validate weight. Okay. In fact, before we even do that, let's write the 3 routines that they showed in the book. All right. In fact, I copied them. I think I've got them in here someplace. I copied these right out of the book. Yep, here they are. So I'm going to grab these. I'm going to put them on the bottom of the screen. Again, I grabbed these right from page 213 of the book. So right before the bottom of my program, way down here, I'm going to copy those 3 in. Now, again, I might get some errors. I'm not worried about that. So the first one here is present. All right. Message box. All right. And they just use a generic thing that says error. So I'm going to make one more constant up here on the top of my screen so I don't have to have that. So let's see. We will say here, we'll just put here error message. All right, again, I can play with that and pretty it up if I need to later. That's fine. But I want it to just be that error message. All right, so again, this is the stuff from the book. And I'm going to change that to error message. And I'll change that one to error message. And I'll change that one to error message. Other than that, I want to see what I can use from here. So text box, if text box.text is empty, all right, then I want to say text box.tag is a required field. Okay. Do the focus, return false. Otherwise, I want to return true. That should work fine as it is. All right. Then we've got this is decimal. Well, I want to change this one to is int. All right. And this will be int number equals 0. And this will be an int 32 dot try parse. All right. Otherwise, give me the error message and return false. Again, I'm just using their code. I wouldn't write it exactly the way they did, but there's nothing wrong with it. Well, they already had an is in 32. Okay. So let me get rid of this. This is the is decimal. We don't even need that. This is the is int 32 right here. All right. All right. So that'll be that. Int number. Yeah, that looks fine. Finally, this will be the range. Okay. And rather than an int min or decimal max and min, there'll be ints max and min, and this will be error message. Okay. All right. That's good because that sure didn't take very long. So let's see if we can go back now and make some changes to the regular program. So first thing I want to do is I want to come in to validate height. All right. So here is where we attempted to do that conversion. We did the try parse right there. All right. So let's see. What do we have here? Is there one of these we can use? There's is present, and it requires a text box to be passed. All right. So I'm going to change this to that returns a Boolean. Okay, so I still have my result. So result equal is present. I think they made it a capital I. Is present, and they're passing in that text box. We don't need this anymore. Right? And we just pass in the whole name, the whole text box there. All right, so if it didn't work, we can still throw our format exception. That's fine. And what's it doing in here? So I just want to double check. So is present. If it's empty, we'll do the message box. It says that it's required field and we turn, that's fine. All right. So that's the first thing we've done is now we're calling again. We are calling the oops, I did the wrong one, didn't I? All right. So we want to say result equal is present txt height. All right. Then if it is not, if it didn't work, we throw the format exception. Now, here's that if statement that's checking the minimum and maximum. So I think we can call the other one of the other ones here. All right. And so what did we have? We have is present, is int 32. Well, we did the is present. So that'll check for it being empty. So this will check for no input in first text box. So if we get down here, there was input or there wasn't input. If there's not input, we're throwing a format exception. So check for numeric input in text box, in first text box. All right. So we can again come in and use our result variable and say result equal, spell, result equal is int 32, and we will again pass txt height. All right. So let's see. If not result, we're throwing that exception. Okay. And finally, if we get to here, now, instead of calling this thing, this height or weight, all right, we're going to say result equals, and that last one had a different name. And it was is within range. And that expects a text box, a minimum value, and a maximum value. Okay. If not result, do this. All right. And that's everything. So I'm going to grab everything I've got in here up until the catches, copy it, and I'm going to put it at the beginning of the weight one and change all my, again, my H's to W's. So and that's in the second text box. That actually should be everything. So let's see if I broke anything. Well, that's a good start. Now with nothing in there, error message, height is required field. That's what I get from the new generic one that I added. All right. And we get this. This was the one I put in. So I could replace mine with what they have there All right. I could go and call my routine from there instead of what they call. There's a lot of ways this could be fixed up. All right. So if I put in a value that's out of range, height must be between 12 and 96. Okay. If I put in something that's not numeric, yeah, that all looks like it's being handled now. Let's do the same checks with the weight being empty. Weight is the required field. There's the information. It changed from height to weight. Again, if I put in something non-numeric, must be an integer. All right, and it stays at weight. And if I put in something out of range, all right, I don't think that's right. It shouldn't say must be an integer. The range message is what I want in there. So we'll have to check that. All right, for some reason, I got to fix that. But if I put in something that's valid, okay, well, look at that. NAN, and it's obese. Well, that isn't right. So there's a couple things that are still wrong in here. We'll have to look at right now. So I'm going to take it from the top. All right. Not worried about it. I don't think the errors are really that great, but we'll see. So we still have our minimum height, our maximum height, our minimum weight, and our maximum weight. We have our invalid messages. Okay. All that stuff, as far as I can tell, that stuff all looks okay. So we've got our status checks. Yeah. We've got our constants. Yeah. Our global, that looks fine. All right. So this keep going. Validate height. If it returned true, we're going to validate the weight. If it didn't return true, we're going to return. That's not changed. And after we validate weight, if it still keep going, we're going to calculate the BMI. We're going to calculate the status. We're going to display the status. Okay, that looks fine. So here's validate height. Let's see what's changed here. So now we're saying result is we're checked for no input. Result equal that. So result equal is present, and we pass in the height. All right. If it returned false, we're going to throw a format exception. Then, so we can, because I wanted us to be able to check all these. So that should really be an else, I believe. All right, because if it was bad, we want to do that. Else, we want to do this. All right. So result equal that. If it didn't work, we want to do that. Otherwise, again, else, we want to do this. All right. If that didn't work, we want to throw that. All right. That should be okay, taking a quick look at it. And then we do the same things now with weights. So again, this will have to become an else. This will have to become an else. And that should be all of that. All right, so return. Yeah, that should all be okay. Oh, let's see if it fixed it. I don't know if it did or not. It's always easiest to check your errors first. So required field, and we get the error. It must be an integer. Get the error. Out of range. Good. We get the error. That's all working. All right, now here's where we had the problem before, was with the weight, so I might have to double check that. So squared field. Must be an integer. Must be between 1 and 777. That's good. So if I come in here and put in something valid now, all right, the body mass index still isn't right, so we'll have to fix that. That's why this is wrong. So we'll fix that right now. Look and see if we can figure out what the problem is with that. So height and weight are both, I want to check the obvious things. They're both global, so that's good. BMI status equal, calculate BMI. Weight and status. Well, this is good because it gives me a chance to show you a little bit of debugging. Now I could come in and just set a breakpoint, but instead I'm going to have a message box right here. And I'm going to say height equals height dot toString. And weight equals, I want to check what it is I'm feeding into here because it's giving me NAN, which is not a number, which I didn't even know you got from here, but that's fine. So let's see. So these will be my height and weight values. I'll do a message box, buttons dot OK, and a message box icon dot error. That should be a comma. And this should have a semicolon at the end. Okay, let's see what that's at least giving us right now. So I'm going to put in valid stuff. So 72, 111. All right, well, height is 0 and weight is 0. That's the reason I'm getting NAN for that value, because it's doing a division by 0. All right, so why am I losing the value for height and why am I losing the value for weight? Got to figure that out right now. That's why I'm getting that garbage. All right. So let's see. Oh, I know what it is. Earlier, I had actually checked the value. Here I'm doing a generic check where I'm saying, is it present? Here I'm doing another check. I'm saying, is it an integer? Okay, and that's fine. All right, so if this passed, before I return true here, it's an integer. So if that's passed and it's within range, all right. So let's see. I'm returning false there, so I can come down here and I can say text box. No, I cannot. I want to set my height and I want to set my weight. They're not being set right now, and that's the reason I'm getting this error. There's different ways of doing this, but I'm going to come up here and do it right here. So here's my there's my height right here. All right, where I'm validating everything. So if I get down to here, everything worked. So I'm going to say height equals, now I can do a convert dot to int 32 txt height dot text. And I can do that because I've now done all the checking. Right? If I got down to that point, it's a valid value and it's within range. So I can do the same thing down here with weight. And here I'll say weight equals convert the weight. Now that should have fixed everything. So let's see. Garbage, so it required must be an integer, out of range. Okay. Required. Come on. Must be an integer. Must be between 1 and 777. Good. Height is 72 and weight is 111. So that gives me a BMI, and it's underweight. If I change that to 177, that now says it's optimal weight. If I change that to 200, it now says that it's overweight. And if I make it 333, it's now obese. So everything is now working. I want to do one more thing, and then basically we're pretty much finished for the period. All right. That is where I put that message box in there. See, I like to do that. If I'm not making it for a company or something, if I'm just doing it myself, I'll take this stuff and put it in there. I might need it later, so I'll keep it there and I'll comment the whole thing out there. So now that message box won't print. All right. So taking this one more time from the top and concentrating only on what we fixed this time. I shouldn't even say fixed, what we changed this time. All right. So taking it from the top then. We said that's, again, just the stuff that's changed. So we made our changes and validate height and validate weight. Now, instead of making this basically the same routine in both of these, we now have two different I should say, rather than making a different routine for both of these, we got the same routine and we're just passing in the text box. So we check first to see if it's even present. All right. And if it's not present, we throw a format exception. Then we check to see if it's an integer. If it's not an integer, we again throw a format exception. Then we check to make sure that it is between 12 and 96. And if it's not, we throw an argument out of range exception. All right. So let's see. And then finally, we do set the height. Then we do the same type of thing for the weight. We check to see if it's present. If it's not present, we throw a format exception. Then we check to make sure that it's numeric. If it's not numeric, we throw a format exception. Then we check to make sure it's within range. So is it between 1 and 777? And if it's not, we throw an argument exception. Otherwise, we set the weight. Then we come in here. This routine hasn't changed at all. All right. It still comes up and gives us that message. Okay. So really about the only way I could clean this up if I wanted to. So this is still the same. This is still the same. That's the same, and that's the same. So let's look at this. So here, instead of this message box dot show, all right, what we could do right there is, I think at least, we could just we could comment this out, or we could take the one that we've got up above where we're showing it and comment it out. I don't really need their error messages because I've got my own. So I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to comment this out. So those three have now been commented out. Now, the only other thing is I'm going in and I'm making that check in here where I am saying, oh, where's my check? This. I'm checking the tag. I'm going to try to comment that out. and see if I can just set that in here in their generic routine. So I want to come in here and say, and this may or may not work, I don't know. But in the is present, okay, if it's empty, that's fine. I can set the focus, that's good. If it's not an integer, I can set the focus, but I also want to say text box dot, okay, text box dot text equals double quote, double quote. And can it take that with a little t? There. So that'll clear that out now. And again, what does that say me? Well, I just literally, I wrote one line instead of two for both of these. Let's see if it still works. Okay, so again, I just put garbage in here. Now we're only calling the one, and it removed what was in there. Again, we're only calling the one, and notice it's removing it right away, but that still is okay. And it's all working. So one last time, give me 5 minutes if you would, taking this from the top. What I want you to understand about this example I just did is what I changed. Okay, so we brought in the 3 different generic error handling routines from chapter 7. The reason I wanted to take a little bit of time and go over this with you, the reason I wanted to mention this to you is from now on, I'm going to be using these 3 routines in most everything we write. I'd like you to get used to using them. Now, when you take your test next week, if you think, well, you wrote this in 2 ways and the first way you did it made more sense, I guess it's okay. But this is more of a standard way of doing it. So for the is present, we pass in the whole text box. So we'll either be passing in txt height or we'll be passing in txt weight. Either way, we're checking for the absence of a value. If there is nothing in there, we don't have to clear it because there's nothing in there. But we set the focus and we return false. All right. Otherwise, we return true. Now, I was always taught that you should have only one return in a routine if you can. So I would have written this, and I'm going to actually rewrite it as bool ret val. You've seen me do this before, equal true, like that. And here I'm going to say ret val equal false, and then return ret val. To me, that's just a cleaner way of doing it because there's only one return statement now. I think that's a better way of doing it. By no means am I saying there's anything wrong with what a Muroc author has done. I'm just saying this is the way I choose to do things. All right, and let's grab that again. That ret val that's in here. All right, and I'm going to say ret val equals, well, it already is true. So now I don't have to even put that in, I guess. So let's see. Ret val equal true. Here we're going to say ret val equal false. And again, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to return ret val. All right. That error should go away. There we go. Okay. And finally doing it one more time here. And as always, I should come in and make sure I didn't break anything. So let's just try it with values that make sense. Okay. Okay, it looks like it all still works okay. So again, What I did in this particular example is I came in here and I tried to incorporate as best I could with some changes, the generic error routines that were shown in chapter 7 of our Muroc text. All right. So the first one, this routine checks for the absence of a value in the text box. This one verifies that the value in the text box is an integer. And finally, the last one verifies that the value in the text box is in range. All right. So I tried as best I could, other than with that ret val, which you didn't have to do. But again, I have one return value in here. It's being set possibly twice, but I only have one return value. In here, I'd have to change this. I with this one, yeah, it already is true. So I'm taking something that was set to true and setting it again. There's probably a better way of doing that. Here it's set to false. And again, there's only one return statement, and same with this one, there's only one return statement. So what I've tried to do today is I've tried to go through and basically go through a couple of what I think were the more difficult. I don't mean that they're hard, but difficult in that there's a lot of different things that we had to worry about and consider in here. And I tried to go through those. Now, one last thing, and I promise that I'm done. It's 10:57. I'll shoot to get you out of here by 11. I'm going to have to change my share in just a second, but it'll be the last time today, I promise. All right, so this is the pretest. Again, you'll have from 8 till 9:30 tomorrow to work on it, or if you want to work on it before that. As it says, you will continue to work on the two different GUI projects that you did in the last pretest. The stuff from A through D, it's going to be on every test. Setting tab order, accept button, cancel button, and start position. All right, changing the form name and the form text. Those are going to be everywhere. I'd like you to start creating program prologues at the beginning of your code. Now, I didn't take off if you didn't do it last time. I will on this next test. Why? Because again, you hopefully will end up putting some of these projects out, and you will be referring to them in your portfolio you have to create at the end of the semester. If you say, I don't know what that is, don't worry about it right now. But the point is, a potential employer could look at it, and I don't want them to think you write 300-line programs that have no code, no comments in them whatsoever. All right. So you will be adding, and I'd like you to at least try to use the ones from Muroc in chapter 7 on page 213 to check for empty, to check that if it's an integer, or you might have to rewrite it to make it a decimal, etc., and do the range checks. We did this before in the exam when we wrote this before, because we hadn't discussed error handling yet. So when we did it earlier, we did it with if statements. Now we're doing it with try-catch blocks. And again, try to modularize that program. All right, and again, add exception handling. So the first one, again, was the Celsius Fahrenheit program. So if there's nothing inputted in either one, and let's say that you press the convert to Celsius, it should come back with something like no value inputted in the Fahrenheit temperature. All right, and here is the way it should look if you do it validly. All right, this was about 8 or 9 pages long. In fact, it was about 12 or 13 pages long because I had a bunch of error things in there. I just showed one error condition and then having it work. I guess there are a couple more. So here's non-numeric. Oh, I lied. Here's out of range. All right. Then we do the same thing with the baseball thing. Again, can't be empty. It's got to be numeric. All right. And it's got to be within range. All right. So there's examples of each. If you attempt to work on this either anytime after the period today, for the rest of the day, or tomorrow, and you have any questions, I will be online from 8 until 9:30 tomorrow. All right, I will be online. I'm not saying I can get to it right away. On Fridays, I go into the other campus or go into the campus. So in case there's things I have to take care of there, I do that. But I should be online from 8 to 9:30. Again, you'll get your question answered. It just may not be within minutes, but it'll be as quickly as I can. Then at 9:30, I will spend approximately, if I need it, a half an hour to an hour on each of these programs, and I will rewrite them using modularization and using the error handling functions that are in the Muroc text. Anybody have any questions on anything we've gone over before? Any code you need to see or anything else? All right, then thanks for attending. I will talk to all of you tomorrow at 9:30. Thanks a lot.